All right, buckle up because we are about to take a trip. Think about Laurel Canyon in the 60s. Sun, freedom, rock and roll, right?
Yeah, peace and love.
Exactly. But what if I told you there's a whole other side to the story?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Today we're checking out Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by David McGowan and Nick Bryant. And let me tell you, this book does not hold back. It dives headfirst into some of the darker possibilities behind this legendary music scene. Get ready for some serious aha moments.
I am so ready.
So one of the first things that struck me about this book is how it uncovers the backgrounds of all these musicians who ended up in Laurel Canyon. You start to see these connections to military families, intelligence ties, and it's like, what's going on here?
Well, think about the historical context. It's the peak of the Cold War.
Right.
And the CIA is deeply involved in all sorts of covert operations, including, get this, cultural manipulation.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. There were programs like Operation Mockingbird, where they were allegedly using journalists and artists to sway public opinion.
So, is it possible they were trying to infiltrate the counterculture? Like, plant these musicians with these backgrounds in Laurel Canyon to kind of steer things in a certain direction?
That's what the book wants us to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, was it just a coincidence that all these people with these ties to the military and intelligence ended up in the same place at the same time? Or was there something more orchestrated happening?
Okay, so that's already pretty wild, right? But then the book hits you with this thing they call the Laurel Canyon death list. And it's like, whoa, this is getting serious.
Right. And we're not just talking about your typical rock and roll tragedies here.
No, not at all. We're talking about people like Graham Parsons, whose body was stolen and burned in the desert. Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys, who drowned under some really bizarre circumstances after his connection to Charles Manson. They even bring up the Black Dahlia murder.
Yeah, and the book suggests that there might be some connection there back to Laurel Canyon. It's crazy, right?
It's like something out of a movie.
And you know what's really striking is the sheer number of these deaths. It's like, statistically, how could this many people connected to this relatively small scene die such untimely and often really strange deaths? It's hard to write it off as just, the dangers of fame or the rock and roll lifestyle.
So are they saying that these deaths were intentional, like part of some kind of cover-up?
That's what the book wants us to think about.
Yeah.
It suggests that there might have been a deliberate effort to silence people who were getting too close to the truth about what was really going on in Laurel Canyon.
Okay, so we've got possible CIA involvement, mysterious deaths. This is already a lot to unpack. But it gets even weirder. The book then dives into some of the specific locations and groups connected to Laurel Canyon, and that's when things take a really strange turn. We're talking about places like Lookout Mountain Laboratory. Have you heard about this? It's nuts.
Oh, yeah, Lookout Mountain. See, this place was like something out of a spy movie. They had this, get this, a whole military base disguised as a film studio.
Right.
Right there in Laurel Canyon.
Seriously?
Yeah, and we're not talking about some rinky-dink operation. They're producing classified films there.
Yeah.
The book says they were putting out even more films than Hollywood at the time.
No way. Who is involved in this?
Apparently, it wasn't just military guys. They say celebrities like John Ford and even Marilyn Monroe had clearance to work there.
Wow. So you've got this strange mix of military intelligence, Hollywood, and then you throw in this whole other element, Vito and his freakers. What can you tell us about that whole thing?
Well, that's how the book refers to them. They were this, I guess you'd call it a group, that was really influential in the early hippie scene, but they were also into some pretty out there stuff.
Like what?
Think drug-fueled parties, potential mind control experiments.
Hold on, mind control. Are we talking M-Cultura stuff here?
Well, the book definitely hints at that possibility. It makes you wonder, were these guys just a fringe element, or were they being used by someone to manipulate the counterculture?
Right, because this was a time when a lot of people were experimenting with new ideas, new ways of living, and I'm guessing that made some people in power pretty nervous.
Exactly. And the book argues that these powerful entities, whether it was the government, intelligence agencies, or someone else entirely, saw an opportunity to kind of steer the counterculture in a direction that served their interests.
So instead of a genuine revolution, you get like a manufactured rebellion.
Right. And when you think about it that way, it puts figures like Charles Manson in a whole new light.
Oh, absolutely. You can't talk about the dark side of Laurel Canyon without talking about Manson. I mean, he's like the poster boy for what happens when things go really, really wrong.
Exactly. And his connections to musicians like Dennis Wilson, Terry Melcher, it adds another layer of creepiness to the whole story. The book kind of implies that Manson's presence in Laurel Canyon wasn't random, like he was intentionally placed there, or at the very least, his rise was orchestrated by someone with an agenda.
It's a terrifying thought, but it's like the deeper you go with this stuff, the more you realize that nothing is as simple as it seems.
Exactly. What we think we know about history, about this era, it might just be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And the really scary part is, we may never know the full truth.
And even if we did, would we believe it? Okay, so we've talked about the possible CIA connections, these mysterious deaths, the occult influences, but now I want to dive into two specific bands that were right in the heart of it all, the Byrds and the Beach Boys. What did the book have to say about them?
Oh, man, where do we even begin? It's crazy because on the surface, they're like the epitome of that California sound. You know, sunshine, harmony.
Good vibrations.
Exactly. But when you look closer, their stories are full of, like, these really dark and unsettling elements.
Okay, so let's start with the Byrds. What makes their story so strange?
Well, the book suggests that even their formation might not have been as organic as we've been led to believe.
Wait, what do you mean? You're saying they were put together?
It's definitely something to think about. They achieved success so quickly. It makes you wonder if there were outside forces at play. You know, maybe someone wanted a band that could bring folk music to a wider audience, and the Byrds fit the bill perfectly.
It's like someone was trying to engineer a cultural movement.
Right. And then you have the Beach Boys.
Who, let's be honest, had a lot of darkness lurking beneath that sunny image.
Yeah, their story is really sad when you think about it. The book talks about the abuse they suffered at the hands of their father, Murray Wilson, who was also their manager.
Which is just messed up on so many levels.
Totally. And it makes you realize that the pursuit of fame, especially at such a young age, can be incredibly damaging. It's like they were robbed of their childhoods, forced to grow up too fast in this really toxic environment.
And then there's the whole Dennis Wilson, Charles Manson connection, which is just disturbing on a whole other level.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole in itself. It's clear that Dennis was drawn to Manson's charisma, but it ultimately led him down a really dark path. And you have to wonder, what did Dennis know about Manson's crimes? Did he have any idea what Manson was capable of?
I mean, the book seems to imply that Dennis might have known more than he ever let on.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about this whole Laurel Canyon story. It's full of these unanswered questions, these loose ends that leave you feeling unsettled.
Like you've just scratched the surface of something really dark and mysterious. It's like this whole thing is a giant puzzle, and we only have a few of the pieces, you know? But the pieces we do have, they point to something really unsettling happening in Laurel Canyon.
And the deaths are a big part of that. I mean, you can't just ignore the sheer number of people who died young, often in really bizarre circumstances. The book makes a strong case that these weren't just random tragedies.
So, if we entertain that idea that some of these deaths were intentional, why? What was the motive?
Well, one theory is that some people got too close to the truth about what was really going on in Laurel Canyon, and they had to be silenced.
Okay, but silenced by who? And for what purpose?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
The book throws out some possibilities. Maybe it was about controlling the counterculture movement, making sure it didn't get too powerful or challenge the status quo.
So instead of an actual revolution, they create this kind of like manufactured rebellion that they could manage.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're in a position of power and you see this massive cultural shift happening, are you just going to sit back and let it happen? Or are you going to try to influence it, steer it in a direction that benefits you?
It's kind of chilling when you think about it like that, because it means that even something as powerful and seemingly spontaneous as the counterculture movement could be vulnerable to manipulation.
Absolutely. And that's why this stuff is still so relevant today. It makes you question everything. Like how much of what we see, what we experience is actually genuine, and how much of it is being influenced by forces we're not even aware of.
It's like, can we even trust our own perceptions anymore? Because if this is true, if there really was this effort to manipulate the counterculture, it means that history isn't always what it seems.
Oh, for sure. I mean, history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
Right. And it's usually only told from one perspective. But weird seas inside the canyon, it throws a wrench in all that.
Right.
It makes you question the official narrative, the stories we've been told about the 60s, and the counterculture movement.
And it makes you wonder what other secrets are still out there, what other stories haven't been told.
It's like we're just scratching the surface, man. There's a whole lot more to uncover. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction. And sometimes the most unlikely stories are the ones that make us question everything we thought we knew.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So the next time you hear a song from the Byrds, the Beach Boys, or any of those Laurel Canyon greats, you might just hear it a little differently. Because behind the music, behind the peace signs and the flower power, there might be a whole lot more going on than meets the eye.